New Orleans Saints head coach Kellen Moore again commits to Chris Olave as a part of the team's future, which means we can finally put a stop to all of those frivolous trade rumors. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, Spencer Rattler or Jake Haener could be on the move if the New Orleans Saints draft a quarterback in this year's draft. Mason Graham, as well as Quinn Ewers, on their way for top 30 visits this week, what they could look like in the New Orleans Saints system. And to kick us all off, Chris Olave is a part of the New Orleans Saints future. We can stop the trade rumors. We appreciate you very much, as always, whether it's your first time or your next time being here with us this time, making us your first listen and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Chris Olave is a part of the New Orleans Saints future. I haven't touched any of the Chris Olave trade rumors and stuff like that because they were all unsubstantiated. I get where things like this come from and everything. One person, says, has some piece about one trade that could work for every team, and one of them has a team trading for Chris Olave, and then that turns into people assuming that it's a report or news as opposed to what it is, which is speculative, scenario work, which has a place and is valuable in the NFL offseason and everything for sure. And things just kind of get a little bit blown out of proportion. That quickly is what happened with Chris Olave this offseason and the trade rumors and discussion around would you trade, would you not trade? But here's the deal. The New Orleans Saints aren't looking to trade Chris Olave. A source close to the team kind of explained to me that what they're trying to do here is build a wide receiver room that complements guys like Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. This was earlier in the offseason before the Brandin Cooks edition, but the idea of complementing guys like Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed rather than replacing guys like Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed sounds like there's no interest in the latter there, and that it's all about continuing to build out that room to have more and more and be able to perform for this team. And so I think, you look at Chris Olave, who in his first two seasons went over 1,000 yards, was the team's leading receiver in his first 2 years, was the team's leading wide receiver in terms of receiving yards. Even last year with just 400 receiving yards, he was the leading wide receiver. Not leading tight end, not leading running back. Actually, I think it was Alvin Kamara that led the team in receiving yards last year, but in 2024. But Chris Olave was the top wideout when it came to receiving yards. And he played, 8 games, 10 games? And so, look, you're not going to trade that away. You're not going to move on from that. There's no reason to, while he's on a rookie contract that still has 2 years left on it, and you have the opportunity after this season, or really not after this season, after this month rather, to pick up a 5th-year option that gives you a little bit of cost-controlled 5th year on his rookie contract of $15.5 million. You're probably going to take that, although you might just try to work out an extension a little bit early, also fine. But in any case, I just never really saw Chris Olave going anywhere. And Kellen Moore's comments at the owners' meetings kind of solidified that. Here's what Kellen Moore had to say about Chris Olave while we were in Palm Beach earlier this week.
Chris is a phenomenal player. Phenomenal player, has had a huge impact on this team. He's going to have a huge impact from a medical side. On my side of it's just education and understanding the circumstances he is in. Obviously, we feel very comfortable with Chris, understanding he's been through a lot the last year or two, and so we feel like there's a plan in place to continue to let him progress. And certainly, I get the feeling that he's really, really excited about this opportunity.
Get the feeling that he's really, really excited about the opportunity. He's been an impact player. He will continue to be an impact player. I mean, that's everything that you need is right there from Kellen Moore about what it is that Chris Olave is going to be for this team going into 2025. And so really all that you're hoping is that he's able to come back and stay healthy. That's kind of the hope here. And you can still add to this room still, like the team went out and got Brandin Cooks. You could still take a Tetairoa McMillan in the first round. Again, I'm not concerned about the video that got leaked. I think if NFL teams were concerned about that, then the video would have leaked a lot earlier. And also the video, again, is multiple years old. And I promise you NFL teams knew about it for multiple years. Like, they've known about that video for a long time. Just because we heard about it for the first time doesn't mean that the NFL teams have. And I don't think any NFL team is concerned that that is still what Tetairoa McMillan is about. Not watching tape, not liking football, all these other things. I think that his play on the field shows you that over the course of the recent years. So with that being multiple years ago, it's clear that things have shifted for where Tetairoa McMillan is in terms of his preparation process, his love for the game, all those other things. And so I think if you add him in the first round at 9, for instance, as a possibility, add him at 9, or you add Trey Harris from Ole Miss in the second round, or you add Jaden Higgins in the second round, you add Savion Smith a little bit later, you add Jack Besh a little bit later, you add Nick Nash much later, you add Andrew Armstrong much later. Like, there's a whole bunch of ways to go, but you get that other big-bodied wide receiver, and then you do what it is that source spoke to me about, which is finding players that complement guys like Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. And then the addition of Brandin Cooks becomes about having another wide receiver that can stretch the field for you, that is a speed player for you, but you also get the veteran leader that you want in that room in an otherwise really, really young wide receiver room. And so I think that that's something that you look at here. And look, the Saints feel that they have some size behind guys like Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, as well as Brandin Cooks. And it's not like Chris Olave is the shortest guy. I mean, he still clocks in at 6'1". Like, he's not a short dude by any stretch of the imagination. But guys like Bub Means and Cedric Wilson, I believe, are the ones that Kellen Moore was referring to at the owners' meeting when he mentioned about, when he still mentioned and was talking about, having size behind guys like Cooks and Shaheed and all that. And so they have some options, but I think you want to go out there and get a dominating option, and a guy like Tetairoa McMillan represents that. Alik Ayumana represents that. Jack Besh represents that. Like, there's a lot of these different types of players. So we can stop all the trade rumors around Chris Olave. Obviously, like, we never say never when it comes to the NFL, right? Like, AJ Brown got traded on draft night. Trust me, anything is possible. Anything is possible. But it doesn't sound like the New Orleans Saints are doing much shopping of Chris Olave. Now, if other teams are calling, the Saints can't stop them from calling, right? If other teams are calling and other teams are offering, and eventually somebody makes some type of ridiculous offer, then obviously you're willing to have that conversation. You're willing to have that conversation about 90 players on your 90-man roster. There's no exception to that. That's always going to be the case, but I don't think you're going to see Chris Olave going anywhere anytime soon. And Kellen Moore, again, committing to him as a part of the team's future kind of helps to solidify that, at least here in April before the NFL draft rolls around. And still opportunities to continue to build around Olave, build around Shaheed, even build with the addition of Cooks around those players. I think this is a really tempting option for Kellen Moore, and certainly he wants to keep these dynamic wide receivers in one place where he will have the opportunity to be able to take advantage of the talents that they bring to his system starting in 2025. Coming up next, a couple of big top 30 visits on the way. Texas quarterback Quinn Ewers, as well as Michigan defensive tackle Mason Graham, what each of those guys could look like in a New Orleans Saints uniform beginning in 2025. We got that next for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time, the best place to go to get last-minute tickets for your favorite events. Looking for a spontaneous trip, maybe even a spontaneous date night. Want to be really impressive? Grab some great seats at a fantastic concert for your partner's favorite music artist or favorite music group, and you got them for a price that doesn't break the bank. Well, Game Time is absolutely the place to go, especially with Game Time Picks, which helps you curate and find all of the best deals so you don't have to sift through thousands of ticketing deals, because there's so much available over on Game Time today, from your favorite sporting events, seeing your favorite teams live, your favorite concerts, favorite music artists. You could look at theater, you could look at comedy as well. There's so much going on, especially in a city here like New Orleans. So go and check them out today. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. It'll get you $20 off your first purchase. That's promo code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints are expected to have two big names come to visit at some point in the coming days and coming weeks. I want to start off with Mason Graham. This was initially reported by ESPN's Jeremy Fowler. And then we'll take a look at Texas Longhorns quarterback Quinn Ewers, reported by our good friend John Hendricks over at Second and Saints, as well as Athlon Sports. And soon here on the Locked On Saints podcast, as we launch our Saints squad show next week, which will feature him. It'll feature Dylan Sanders, Lance Moore, and myself. Yes, that Lance Moore. Yeah, he's on the show too. So we're really, really excited to get that show launched. You should be launching sometime next week. Keep you up to date with the times. It will be live on YouTube and then go out after. So I'll keep you up to date on all of that. But both of these are solid players for the New Orleans Saints to be looking at, depending upon where it is that they look to select each of these players. Now, Mason Graham's draft outlook, draft pick position, all of that already predetermined. He's a potential top 5 guy. The New Orleans Saints are drafting at number 9. If he happened to fall to them at number 9, I would be hard pressed to say that he's not the best possible. Let me rephrase that. I would be hard pressed to say that he's not the best realistic candidate to fall to them at 9 that, goes off the board to them. Like, there's no way I imagine the New Orleans Saints passing on Mason Graham if he ends up making it there. And by the way, I'm going to say this now. If for the rest of this segment at any point I say Mason Taylor, unless you hear me say tight end specifically, I am actually talking about defensive tackle Mason Graham. You'll have to forgive me because I did that earlier when I was tweeting something out about an article that I wrote, and then I called him Mason Taylor instead of Mason Graham. Whoops. So it's only a matter of time. But Mason Graham, 3.5 sacks last season, over 40 tackles as well, over 10 of those, double-digit tackles for a loss for the season. He had a batted pass at the line of scrimmage. He's just a disruptive force with an incredibly high motor, a guy that just never stops. He just plays through and through and through, not in an uncontrolled way, not in a way that's going to draw a lot of penalties, doesn't play through the echo of the whistle or anything like that, does a very good job of understanding when a play starts and when a play is over, don't get me wrong. But man, that motor is just insane. Like, his ability to chase people down, his work ethic at the line of scrimmage in terms of fighting second, third, fourth efforts, just pushing and pushing and pushing. He is the type of guy that you had the 330-pound guy next to him in Kenneth Grant. Mason Graham was the one that was drawing the double teams, not the 330-plus pound guy, but the 6'5", 300-pound guy is the one that was pulling in all of the double teams. Like, he is an absolute game wrecker on the interior. And he could be a really interesting fit for New Orleans because they already have Bryan Bresee, who's a similar style of player. But I do think that the two of them on the field together is not a bad idea. You think about when the Saints would go into their NASCAR packages, right? Where they had the 2 edge rushers on the outside and then they moved an edge rusher to the interior. Imagine that NASCAR package not necessarily being the NASCAR package anymore, but in an even front system or an even front, play call, where you have 4 down linemen. What if you had 2 edge rushers and then you had Bryan Bresee and Mason Graham on the interior on a 3rd and 7, a 3rd and 8, a 3rd and 12, like an obvious passing situation and everything. Then all of a sudden you have all of these pass rushers that could end up having a massive impact for you. Remember, from the interior, it was Bryan Bresee last year that led the Saints in sacks last season. Guys like Chase Young and Carl Granderson got into the backfield for 5.5 sacks. Bryan Bresee led the team in the sack. So I think having that additional interior force definitely makes a big impact for New Orleans, or could make a big impact for New Orleans. And yes, they've done a lot of work on the interior already this offseason. They traded for former LSU Tiger Devon Godchaux, bringing him in, somebody that can play nose tackle, but that can also be a 3-4 defensive end for you. They brought in Jonah Williams as well. He could play some of that inside game as well. And, that's great. But you're not just drafting for 2025. You're drafting for 2026, 2027, 2028, 2029. And so you got to be ready with the fact that Colin Saunders is in a contract year. Nathan Shepard got a 1-year extension going into next year in order to be able to help sort of facilitate a reduction in salary this season, or facilitate a moving of the money that helped out the salary cap this season, we'll say. But that doesn't necessarily mean that both of those guys are in the building next year, especially with Colin Saunders on the final year of his contract here in New Orleans, the 3rd year of 3. And so you got to be ready to continue to add talent at that position. Now, you can do that all throughout this draft. Guys like Deion Walker, guys like Jordan Phillips out of Maryland. Deion Walker, of course, is the big defensive tackle from Kentucky. You look a little bit later to a Riley Mills out of Notre Dame, a Howard Cross out of Notre Dame as well. there's players that you can invest in late that would end up having some kind of impact for you or be developmental pieces for you, things like that. But for New Orleans, like if you get an opportunity at one of the absolute no questions asked best players in this year's draft in Mason Graham, you're probably going to take your opportunity there. The issue is that you've got to see him get to you, right? The Jags, you've got the Giants, it's not the Giants, I'm sorry. The Jets could potentially scoop him up. I could see the Panthers scooping him up as well. I know that it sounds like they want to focus on defense in the draft. And I don't blame them. And so that is something worthwhile. You might have to move up if you really, really want him, if you designate him as a guy that is going to be like a can't miss prospect for you if you're the New Orleans Saints. But I think that if he got there for you at 9, he's an easy selection. And so I don't know, it's got me wondering, like, what are, I think about Tedoroy McMillan's up there at 9, Mason Graham's up there at 9, Shedeur Sanders is up there at 9, Tyler Warren's up there at 9, Jahdae Barron, Will Johnson would probably be in the conversation as well, depending upon his offseason medicals and stuff like that, but didn't allow a touchdown in his entire collegiate career. So if his medicals check out, you definitely want to invest in that. I mean, the Saints are in a really good position here to be able to walk away with a playmaker at 9 overall. Not the place to draft a project, that's for sure. Now, the Saints could potentially go quarterback at 9 as well if Shedeur Sanders were to fall, or if they fell in love with Jackson Dart, maybe even trade back into the first round for a Jackson Dart. But there are some of the quarterbacks that could be had a little bit later that are obviously intriguing to New Orleans as well. They've been connected to guys like Jackson Dart, but they've also been connected to guys like Kyle McCord out of Syracuse, as well as Texas Longhorns quarterback Quinn Ewers, and those connections continue. The Saints didn't get to see him at the Senior Bowl. I feel like it was an injury in the postseason that ended up keeping him out of the Senior Bowl, if I remember correctly. And so they saw him at the Combine. They had dinner with him on the Monday before his Tuesday Pro Day, which they were also present to see. And then now they're bringing him in for a top 30 visit sometime mid-April per John Hendricks over at Athlon. And I think, look, I poo-pooed the idea of drafting Quinn Ewers at 40 before, round 2, pick 40. It's not that I don't like Quinn Ewers, it's that I don't like the selection at round 2, pick 40. But Quinn Ewers with one of the 3rd round picks, Quinn Ewers with one of the 4th round picks, Quinn Ewers, if you want to trade into the 5th, if he's still there, makes a ton of sense. Finding him in kind of those middle rounds makes a ton of sense. And so you'll see, I mean, he's a guy that's a lot like Spencer Rattler, highly recruited, highly ranked coming out of high school, was a guy that was expected to be one of the top quarterbacks by the time that he had graduated early on. And then that ended up not necessarily coming to fruition. Some injuries, things like that, of course, getting in the way. And then now he's kind of a mid-round guy. And so if you like the upside that he potentially brings, there's a shot that you can take. And if the Saints take that shot at quarterback in those mid-rounds, that's kind of the place that probably makes the most sense if they're not getting one of those top quarterbacks in the conversation. And that's where things can get really interesting for the Saints' potential or current, rather, makeup at quarterback. They have quarterbacks behind Derek Carr, but what if they bring in another young player at the position? I want to break down what that would mean for the future of Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener. Let's get to that next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. If the New Orleans Saints were to invest in a quarterback in this year's draft, it would certainly cause a shakeup behind starting quarterback Derek Carr, who we still expect to be the starter at this time. I don't think there was anything that Kellen Moore said yesterday. My goodness. What a whirlwind of travel that was. I don't think there was anything that Kellen Moore said yesterday that indicates anything other than they expect Derek Carr to be the starting quarterback. Now, I think I wouldn't be surprised if things were, let's just say, not as great behind the scenes as things are out in front of the curtain, but that's okay. That doesn't change the fact that Derek Carr is still probably the quarterback in 2025. And so with that, you're looking at what's going to happen behind Derek Carr. And we highlighted in yesterday's episode some of Kellen Moore's comments about the idea of wanting to make sure that a backup quarterback was solidified before the regular season, using OTAs, training camp, as well as the preseason to be able to kind of figure out or determine who that quarterback was going to be. And that once that quarterback was decided upon, that guy would be the backup quarterback. Now, the reason why I've stressed this so much is because that's not what the Saints did last year. Dennis Allen wanted to push this idea of like the backup quarterback raging all throughout the season and stuff like that, to the point where starting quarterbacks weren't being announced until the Friday, at least publicly, the Friday before games on, Sunday and all this other stuff. And these guys were genuinely sharing snaps during practice, even though there weren't really that many snaps to go around in the first place when it came to what they were doing behind Derek Carr when he was healthy in practice and all these other things. And so it just didn't work. It just didn't work. And so you look at the fact that Kellen Moore is coming in and saying like, yeah, we're going to determine who that person is over the course of OTAs, training camp, and preseason. And I'll be honest, I've heard some people say that they feel that is curious because they feel that this quarterback in Jake Haener should just be the backup quarterback, or this quarterback in Spencer Rattler should just be the backup quarterback. Well, fact of the matter is that it might not be between those two. It might be between those two and Ben DiNucci, who's the veteran quarterback. I got to include his name, right? And then, some quarterback that they draft. And that's where things get really interesting. What if the Saints do draft a Kyle McCord or a Quinn Ewers or heck, a Jalen Milroe or something like that, to where you draft a Jackson Dart. Jackson Dart's your backup quarterback, right? Like that's pretty clear. That's where the cutoff is for me. If you draft Jackson Dart, Shedeur Sanders, or Cam Ward, you know that those guys are sitting behind Derek Carr for 2025, unless they trade Derek Carr because they feel really good about one of those three prospects being their starter. That could happen. I don't want to rule that out. But if we're just talking about the backup scenario here, right? Assuming that Derek Carr is the starter in 2025, then those guys are guys that come in and probably don't have to compete. They come in with the expectation instead. But anybody after that, Jalen Milroe, Kyle McCord, Quinn Ewers, Will Howard, like all these guys, you're probably bringing them in and saying, come in and compete for that backup quarterback role. And so if the Saints were to do that, then all of a sudden, it's not just handed to a Jake Haener. It's not just handed to a Spencer Rattler. And that's where things get really interesting. Because what do? You're not going to carry 5 quarterbacks on your roster, right? You'll probably carry that through mandatory mini camps or not mandatory mini camps, but rookie mini camps and things like that. Because I imagine like Spencer Rattler seems like the type of person that would show up for rookie mini camp to compete and be with the team and all these other things. Jake Haener didn't do that last year, could do that this year. Ben DiNucci would be, kind of like the Kellen Mond of this year, as somebody that can kind of come in and take some passes and all that. And then you would have that rookie. And so with all of that in place, who do you keep? Who do you move on from? And so Ben DiNucci could end up seeing his time in New Orleans be short, right? He was a late ad last year. They've kept him on. I think he's somebody that they like having around as like that veteran quarterback presence in the back and all that. But now like Jake Haener's got multiple years of experience. He's got a start under his belt. Spencer Rattler's got a full year of experience with multiple starts under his belt and everything. And so the NFL starter experience stuff is there. And so if you parted ways with Ben DiNucci, I don't think that you're like, kneecapping yourself at any point or anything like that. So then the competition becomes between the rookie quarterback and then the 2 young quarterbacks in Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener. And then one of those guys wins the backup quarterback role. And then are you going to keep 4 quarterbacks on the roster? Probably not. And so you would probably start to look at what the trade market looks like for guys like Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler. Now, if I were to project this out, my projection would be that if any of those 3 quarterbacks or either of those 2 quarterbacks was more likely to be on the move, it's probably Jake Haener. Jake Haener was drafted 2 coaching staffs ago. Spencer Rattler was drafted 1 coaching staff ago. And let's just face it, the potential behind Spencer Rattler has always been considered higher than the potential when it comes to Jake Haener, right? The number 1 overall prospect, expected to be the number 1 overall pick. And then he had, Oklahoma to South Carolina and all the stories that come with that. And then he ends up going in the 5th round and he was considered one of the steals of the draft and all these other things. Like if the NFL does what it is, and look, I'm not even casting personal opinion in this. This is me discussing like what the overall view of these players are at an NFL level. Like I just spent time with coaches and everything like that. Like we got an idea of like who likes what. And I'm not talking about Saints coaches, I'm talking about across the NFL and stuff. And so like you start to get an idea of how people feel about players when you start to hear them talk and all these other things. And so it's just kind of the reality of the situation. The NFL loves potential. And when you look at potential has always been on, the conversation of potential has always been on Spencer Rattler's side. And so I think that you start to look at what the trade market can give you on either one of those guys. And then more than likely, Jake Haener would be the one that would either get dealt or end up potentially being moved on from, so he can go and join another team, get another opportunity somewhere else and start things off fresh. Or maybe the return on a Spencer Rattler is so appealing that it makes you pull the trigger on that. Like, we have to acknowledge that all of these things are absolutely possible. But the bottom line is that when it comes to the shakeup at quarterback, if the Saints were to draft a quarterback in this year's draft, it is really, really interesting. And one of those two guys could be on the move one way or another, whether that is being moved on from so that they can go and find another opportunity somewhere, or being traded. And if the interest is there and you can return even a late round draft pick, right? You invested a 4th round pick in one guy, you invested a 5th round pick in another. If you get a late round draft pick back, it's a good return to get on those players. And you'll probably get a little bit better than a late round draft pick because you got the quarterback tax. That's a part of it all. And so it's interesting. It's kind of like what happened to Ian Book, right? Ian Book got drafted, and then other quarterbacks came in, and all these other guys like Jameis and everybody kind of joined, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, Ian Book was on his way out, and no one was surprised by that. And I think that that's similar to what you could see here if the Saints do what they have done, which is continue to invest at the quarterback position. It'd be very, very interesting to see how that all plays out and which of those two young quarterbacks could potentially end up no longer on the roster. Coming up in tomorrow's episode, I want to share with you Damian Parson of the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast gave us 2 different players that make sense for New Orleans, and I love both of his selections. He gave us those during the Ultimate New Orleans Sports Show, so I want to share that clip with you, and then we'll break each of those players down as well, come back to find out who they are, as well as anything else going on around your New Orleans Saints. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation, I'll holla at you.